Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fresh Wave Podcast. This podcast is for youth, by youth.
And Johnny.
And today is Season 4, Episode 16. We're going to be talking a little bit about our retreat, which was on following God, and our takeaways from what God has put on our heart.
Let's get it going. Hey, we are still half asleep here on a tired Monday morning after a long weekend that was full of lots of incredible things. And we are here to share all that the Lord taught us this weekend over in Pennsylvania, as we experienced a great retreat away with our teens. So looking forward to talking about it. And we are caffeinated up from the Great Barrister.
Yep.
Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor, just a good place to go to.
True.
Check it out.
I get a lot of love from this channel. They got
Yeah,
some love.
They
that
do.
is true.
They got some
They
love
do.
on their previous recording too.
That's crazy. Well, it was a fun weekend. Enjoyed it with both of you, along with our dozens and dozens of other people
Yeah.
as well.
Dozens.
You still feeling pretty tired?
No, I'm good.
You're good?
Ready to go. It
All
could be
right.
the 2 barristers I've consumed today.
Yeah.
But
I wasn't as tired as the fall retreat. The fall retreat, I was wiped out.
Yeah.
This one wasn't as bad.
Yeah. This one's
I
kinda
got
chill.
more sleep, I think, at night.
Changing the narrative.
so for those who don't go to this, change the narrative. For those of you who don't go to our church, we have 2 retreats, fall retreat, winter retreat. And I feel like the fall retreat is always more like, there's a lot more going on. And it seems like the winter retreat has
That's
now
true.
kind of just more like relaxed. It's kind of like, they have different vibes, which is, I think, good.
They do. That's true. That is a good thing. That is a good
Yeah.
thing. Like, it's dead of
Yeah.
winter. It's freezing out.
Yeah.
It's just chill.
I feel like the fall one is like more focused on like community because we have like the teams. We do more team games.
Yeah.
But then with this one, there's a lot more focused on like our sessions and like our small groups.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's like the main difference.
That is true. I like that. You should keep doing that. Changing the narrative.
Change it.
And sleep by midnight. Can we do it?
We did it 1.5 times.
Yeah.
So the theme for the weekend was I follow Jesus. The context of that was just I like to watch The Chosen, and I think it's interesting to kind of like visually see people follow Jesus, like physically, and to see what that looks like. Just watching Jesus say, all right, we're going to get up and we're going to go to this city. And they all just get up and follow him. They're like, all right, we're going to go eat over here. They all get up, pack their bags, they follow him. Jesus turns around, they're following him. He starts talking and they all just like stare at him. You know, Matthew's got his book open. He's taking notes. He's listening to every single word he's saying. So it's just kind of this idea of like, what does it look like to actually follow Jesus? Like, we're not physically following him. So how do we follow him and engage with him like they did? They listened to him. They were expecting him to say something like incredible, and they're writing it down. So we decided to do that this weekend, teach on that, and then also have our leaders teach on what they have learned from following Jesus. And it was great. Tim was one of our speakers along with some of our other leaders. So yeah, it was just some great takeaways from different experiences that they've had and what's been going on in their lives. And yeah, so we have 3 people that here follow Jesus. So what is something from following Jesus this past weekend you took away? That's what we're going to talk about and kind of go into it. So what's something?
I think the session that I really loved was Corey's talk. I really loved him just talking about protecting our heart, keeping boundaries, but also being vulnerable, being emotional, being able to be in tune with those emotions as well, not letting them, just be not under control at all and chaos, but also not shoving them down or pressing them down, not talking to people about them. And something that really struck me about his message was him talking about becoming a safe person for people. So many times, obviously, like in our nature to want to talk about our own problems, we go out and try to find those people who we can truly trust. They won't gossip about us. They won't spread this to someone else. It won't even just become a conversation filler for them with someone else and kind of talk about your emotions or your feelings on this. And just how important it is to become that safe person for other people. And I loved how he mentioned, like, if we all do that, we become a community of safe people. Now the community is a place where we can be open and honest with every single person. And you're not worried about finding the right person to tell your emotions to. And just how that builds our trust and reliance on one another. So I like how he focused that inward on like our own hearts, becoming that safe person for other people.
Yeah, I feel like that's a question I've never asked myself. Like,
Yeah.
do people view me as a safe person to share
Yeah.
whatever about? Like, that's such an important question. Like, I hope everybody there asked themselves that and actually like reflected, like, am I a safe person? Then you have to ask yourself a follow-up question. Like, when someone tells me something, am I excited to tell someone else after that?
Yeah.
Like, all right, Maddie just told me this
Yeah.
thing. Oh, I can't wait to tell, my friend this about it.
Yeah.
See if they know.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Because there is something, for whatever reason, like there is something about, I know something you don't know. Like, why is that
Yeah.
a cool factor?
Yeah, I also think I find myself, like, if I'm having a conversation with another person and, like, that person happens to come up, I'm like, why do I feel the need to, like, tell them that they told me this? And not necessarily that it's, like, if someone tells you, like, oh, this is a secret, like, please do not share this with anyone. Like, I really just need your advice. I really don't want this going anywhere. But if people come to you to talk to you about something they're dealing with, but they didn't really preface that it was a secret, like, why do you kind of hold on to that as if maybe you could tell someone else? I think keeping that safety of the conversation between you two, but also when everyone becomes a safe person, then there's really no need to feel like you'll be judged or like now your name's floating around and all these rumors are starting. And you kind of feel negatively affected by the fact that you opened up to someone. Like, that should never be an effect of that. And in following Jesus, that's like our goal, to just be a safe person, be a person that someone can come to and be vulnerable with. And also have the right words and wisdom and truth to speak over their heart in that moment.
Yeah. It's funny. I had a very similar, I think basically the same takeaway as you, and I'll get into that. But
Did you actually? Is that what you're going to share?
I was going to share something similar. Yeah. And that's okay. We'll just talk
That's
about
all
that
right.
a little longer.
Yeah.
No, but I think when it comes to being a safe person and like, why do we do that? I know that's something it's gossip is something that really bothers me. I know I'll be in situations where it's funny and this makes me feel hypocritical, but I will be sitting somewhere and there's a group of people talking about somebody and they're not there and it bothers me. I'm just like, it weighs on my soul. But then I also get that urge to be like, oh, did you hear this?
Yeah.
Right. But I feel like it comes with people, like for me, it's like mutual people, like mutual friends. Like, did they tell you this? Did they hear this about
Right.
you? And I don't know if that's great either. Even if it's like between friends, like this could be something that, they should share with you. So, doing my best is like, oh, did so-and-so mention this to you? Like very broadly. No. Okay. Well, I'll let them do it. That's kind of something that I try to practice. And even realizing that, like, that's not necessarily something you should really talk about unless that person's there anyway. So, we're just growing on the show today.
Yeah, we are.
But I think it comes from this longing for, acceptance, right? I feel like when we have a valuable information that like, oh, this person would find this interesting. How can I, build this, connection with other people based on what I already know? And I feel like we're always like, and what it does is it ends up putting us in a weed of different things, because it's like, oh, this person told me this, but I'm going to use this information to hoist myself with that person, and then this other thing and then what you do by trying to get all these connections is you actually weaken connections while you're trying to grow other ones, and you end up not getting anywhere.
Right.
Yeah,
Because
that's
while
so
you're
true.
trying to build up all these connections by using information you have about other people, you're just lowering your status and
Yeah.
credibility with other people, and it really gets you nowhere when you really think about it. So if that helps you, I just thought of that now. So
Yeah.
That's true. I know someone that always has something to share, and it's not necessarily in a gossipy sense. It's just kind of like, oh, did you hear this happen? This happened.
Yeah.
This happened. And for a while, I never thought about it, and then I was like, oh wow, I don't think I would ever tell this person something that I needed to kind of remain between us.
Yeah.
They're a good
Yeah.
person, but I was just like, I don't think I would ever share anything with them, just because I know that they tell me all these things about all these other
Yeah.
people, and I'm like, now they're probably going to go to other people and share things that I shared. So
Yeah.
that's true. I think implicitly we don't even realize it. It took me a while to realize. I'm like, oh wow, I actually don't trust this person.
Yeah. I do think you do get in situations at some points, though, that, especially spiritually, and I actually plan on doing this a little bit later, where you have a conversation with somebody or there's a situation that you think other people can grow from. And what I try to do in those situations is not use the name. Like I had a conversation with someone about this, right? And just kind of being broad and getting to the point. And I think even that, I think it takes so much out of it, because like if you see someone can benefit from a conversation you have, I think if it's general and you're not giving the person away, I think that can be okay. But I also don't want to be like, oh, this is who I had the conversation with. This is what they brought to me. This is why, exactly word for word why they're struggling. So I think there are, I don't want to use the term like there's ways around it, but I guess there's ways around it in that sense. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Like there's ways to keep people protected when you're talking about those conversations. Like even protecting other people's hearts. Like, I think it seems harmless at first, especially what you were mentioning, like you notice people harmlessly talking about something and it might be a way to build a connection or share an experience. But then it becomes harmful when you realize they're very open about this, about my experience with whoever it is, like a friend, a parent or whatever, but they would actually use that. Like they would share that with someone else. And so I think something so harmless can become harmful to other people. So keeping someone's name out of it, protecting them from that, like if they're not part of the conversation, then their name doesn't have to be involved. Like you're still sharing an experience, you're building a connection with someone off of an experience, but you're not bringing someone else into it or their own trauma or their own experience that they don't really want shared with anyone else. Yeah.
I think a good, way of doing that, just in general, when you, as a red flag, and kind of just avoid gossip, is kind of start training yourself to when you start hearing it. And this is something my brother and I have started doing recently. And it came up on the fall retreat, actually, where we were talking about this. I forget who said it. I think it was you, I think, who brought this up based on a meeting you had. We were at a family gathering once, and we started talking about this one person, and it started to bother me. And it was just like, all right, you know what? They're not here to defend themselves, so we should stop talking about it. And you kind of train yourself when you start to hear gossip, or even when you start to gossip yourself, because we're weak, we fall into stuff like that, and kind of start training yourself. Look around. Oh, they're not here. Like we shouldn't be talking about them, especially in an accusatory way. Oh, they're like this. They did this.
Right.
Why did they do that? Well, they're not here to explain why they did it.
That's true.
So maybe
we can speculate for an hour.
Yeah.
Yep.
Over why.
Me and another girl on the winter retreat, we were doing this thing where if something popped into our brains that we wanted to share with one another, not necessarily that it was judgmental, but whether we would know that it would lead us into gossip, we would say to each other, 15-second plank, and then that person would do a 15-second plank. And it seems silly, but the more I think about doing it, my mind has trained me to be like, oh, 15-second plank. But it's like, why am I thinking about this? Because I was just about to share something that could have been hurtful to someone. And it's like discipline. It's like training.
It's classical conditioning.
Yeah. And it works because it gets your brain to associate those two things together. And I think at first we don't even become aware of it until, I only was aware of it until after I said it. Well, we should be training our brains to when that thought pops in our head, before we open our mouths, our brain should also click another thing together and say, why would I do a 15-second plank right now? Because I was going to say something judgmental, or because maybe I was about to share that with someone that it's gossip. So just putting those two things together helps me recognize it before I even say it, which I think is something that I used to struggle with and still obviously do. Hopefully not obviously, but still do, as obviously falling short is something that happens, but just noticing that more before it comes out of my mouth, because that saves the harm from other people.
Yeah. I think we are very capable of knowing when, because for me, like if I know I'm about to gossip, there's like an actual feeling. Like there is a feeling of like, oh, I'm about to share this. Yeah. Like there is like a little like, I don't want to say like butterflies in your stomach, but you kind of get this little like, oh, I can't wait. Let me just. Yeah. Like and you're gearing up for it. You're ready for it. A majority of the time, maybe sometimes you don't, but like I do feel like more often than not, you are very well aware you're about to share something that is gossip in nature.
You know, it's funny. I know exactly what feeling you're talking about. And I actually, if you think about it, like that little like excited, nervous.
Yes, that's what it is. That's what it is.
I can think back and I can think of like, I feel like you only really get that specific feeling when it comes to sin, right?
Wow.
Like you don't get that feeling when you're about to go into this like really amazing worship thing, right? Like I remember, stuff that I was doing in college and knowing that, it's not good, and that same butterfly feeling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Same kind of like nervous energy, nervous excitement. Where it's like you're excited about it because your flesh is excited about it, but something inside of you is not. So it's this like tension almost inside of your body, and that's what you're feeling. And I can't tell like when you're a little kid and you're about to sneak out into your and play video games at 3 a.m. when you're not supposed to. That kind of like that same feeling. I don't think I've ever felt that. I don't know. I don't know about you guys. I don't know
It's
if I've
like
ever
a
felt that about
different,
something good.
like, form of excited. Like, I think there's like the soul form of being excited when you're excited to worship. You're excited to go through this experience with God, but then there's also that like excited feeling of like, I'm about to like tell someone this, or I'm about to do this, and it's just like, I'm trying to think of another word for
Or
like,
is it almost like maybe not excitement, but it's like we know it's rebellious in nature.
yeah,
Yep.
like
You
it's that
know?
rebellious like feeling.
It's almost like, remember we had Adrian Livingston here, and she was talking about how the humans are the only creature that don't listen to our not intuition, but when there's someone
conscious?
when there's like when there's like a fearful situation,
Yeah.
we're the only creatures
It might
that's
be
like,
intuition.
it's actually not that bad. I think I'll be okay.
I think it's intuition.
Yeah.
We don't listen
Maybe,
to
yeah.
our
The
whatever.
Yeah, it's like
internal-
like conscience.
Yeah.
kinda.
Yeah, like every animal, if they think there's something bad or fearful, they listen and they run away.
Yeah.
But we're always like, well, actually, no, I think we're okay.
can
Whatever. We
justify
talk ourselves
this.
out of
Yeah.
it. So I think a lot of times we get that feeling, and then we just kind of like, almost
Yeah.
it almost is like rebellious, and we just go through
Yeah.
with it.
It's so interesting.
I think also back to like the retreat talks. I also like the way that Corey's talk about protecting our heart and Tim's talk like kind of went hand in hand with how like our heart and our desires change with like God's grace. And so when we're protecting our heart, we are also protecting godly desires that are given to us. And how like the more we recognize and accept God's mercy and grace for forgiveness, the more we find ourselves picking ourselves up after sin, and striving towards God. Because, I mean, that's what God loves. Like, he loves to see us coming back to him, and he's never counting the amount of times you've fallen down. But he will recognize the times you've gotten back up. And just that importance of, like, the more we accept God's grace, the more that we can protect those godly desires, and the more they, even, like, we're talking about, like, conviction and, like, recognizing our conscience, the more the more we pray over it and the more we're in God's presence, the more we have that, I think, to recognize, I'm about to gossip. Like, you start to notice that God is transforming your heart and it's changing your actions now. And that's something to be protected. Conviction is something to be protected. We don't want to lose that or become numb to it just because we want to ignore it.
Yeah. I think that there's a difference, since you mentioned my talk. I think that
I could speak into that.
I think there is a difference, but a huge difference between conviction or your heart being broken over your own sin versus you beating yourself up over your own sin and feeling guilt and shame over that. Like I used the example, I went through Romans chapter 7, and there's this line in there, wretched man that I am. He's talking about his sin. He's talking about, how annoyed he is over his own sin, right? And wretched man that I am. And I spent some time on that where it's like, that's very relatable for me because I find myself beating myself up over a lot. Like I'm very hard on myself for a lot of things. And I think there's a difference there. I think when we sin, that's obviously not good, right? And I think there's a difference. It's totally good, and I think we should ask for our hearts to be broken when we sin. But that's different than just looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, you suck.
Yeah.
I can't believe you
100%.
did this again.
Yeah.
I can't believe you fell into this again. You're horrible. You're an awful Christian. Like, I can't believe you did that, right? Versus
Yeah.
this godly broken heartedness, like I did something against God's character, right? I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. It breaks my heart, right? But either way, we know that there's no condemnation because of that, because of the endless grace that God has. So I think you can be brokenhearted over your own sin, but still walk forward knowing God's grace. I think it's harder to walk forward if you keep beating yourself up over it. And I think
Yeah.
that's the that's the issue why I kept getting into these cycles, because I would mess up and I would just like totally just feel horrible about myself
Yeah.
for like not the correct way. And it would just like, I was so absorbed with how poorly I was doing as a Christian that I totally forgot, about God's grace and redemption in me, that I just lost this connection with him.
Yeah. And because like Satan likes to see us fail, I think he creates that pocket of like, instead of it's breaking our heart, now it's becoming guilt and shame that
Yeah.
we're clinging to. And I think he likes to kind of help us store that in our heart instead of like releasing it and just letting us come back to God. So of course, like he'll like to keep us down when we fall. Instead of letting us say, we fell, we'll get back up. It's we fell, we're down. Oh my gosh, what do I do now? I can't even get back up. Like, God won't even help me up. Like, all these lies that he likes to help us believe. That I think guilt and shame become something that is very dangerous that Satan likes to use against us. So I agree. I think there's a very big difference between being brokenhearted over our sin and just falling into that shame that lets it consume you.
Yeah, and what that leads to is something that also came up a little bit this weekend is, do we exhaust God's grace? Like, does there become a point where we mess up so much that, we have to go through this whole process of becoming saved again? And I think that's a real thing that people struggle with. They feel like this messing up, and they listen to that voice inside of their head that's not of God, of you're just being an awful Christian. You're not even saved. You've done this too much. Like, you've exhausted his grace. Yeah. And I think that's a real thing people struggle with.
Yeah, totally. So it's also like having a cheap grace versus costly grace mentality. Just like understanding like what it truly cost Jesus and his life on the cross, I think would give you that exactly what you said. Like, is this a brokenness over your sin? Because if you view grace as costly, you'd be like, oh, like a mourning over that, right? Versus kind of like what you're saying before, like this just shame and embarrassment and other things that would fall under that category.
I think the like cheap grace, costly grace also goes for, do we exhaust his grace? Like, are we viewing the grace as so little as he can only have a little amount of it? Like, yeah, like Jesus died, but like, I don't know if it can cover all of my sin. I don't really know if I can get back up after this. Versus like, this was the ultimate sacrifice. This was a perfect sacrifice. This grace cost God a lot. And it's because it would cover and atone for a lot. It would pay all of our debts, not just some of them, or sometimes, or when we do it 5 times, but not 70 times. Like, it's kind of viewing it as this grace was costly enough to cover all of my sin. And I think there is a difference between it's habitual sin, you're living in darkness, you're doing this on purpose, versus like, I'm falling short because I am human. I'm saved, but I'm falling short. I'm not in heaven yet. Like, I haven't received that eternal gift yet. But still recognizing this grace cost Jesus, cost God, his only son. This was a perfect, holy sacrifice, and it covered everything. It covered all of my debt. I can't even pay a morsel of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
Man, you took a lot away from this weekend, Maddie.
I guess I'll share some things I learned as your guys' sharings are very similar.
I do have a little more on that, but I can go after you.
Okay.
Like slightly different if we have time for it.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So my thing that I kind of took away that I was deeply impacted by was, they're kind of similar, was Duran's message, as well as kind of the high school small group that we had with the boys. Was this just idea of comforting others in their affliction? And
that was the other part that I was going to say. So we're just coming together.
You're right in the middle.
I'm right in the middle. It's like the Venn diagram.
Rightfully so.
Venn diagram here.
So Duran's message was on just, life experiences last few months, very challenging, illnesses in the family, loss of family, just the storm that they've been walking through, and how she just, from the beginning, said, Jesus is going to be my firm foundation from the start and will continue and carry me through all of it. Which is very impactful for everybody there, just seeing her testimony. And I just thought of what we read a week ago as our church is going through 2 Corinthians, and which in 2 Corinthians it says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction. And with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." And I thought Duran's talk was like that. Like, I was just like, all right, when the struggles come, like, I'm going to remember this. Like, this is going to, like, I felt equipped for dry seasons, for valleys. I felt equipped after that. And because of the affliction she went through, she looked to the Lord to comfort her. And now I felt like comforted everybody in that room. And then with the boys' small group side, like, we experienced some like awesome vulnerability. Yeah. Just like one guy said, you know what, here's a time of my affliction. And all the other guys were just, oh, wow, wait, yep, me too. Whether it was a struggle with sin or whether it was a struggle with just school and friends and like trying to work things out, everyone was like, oh, I've experienced that. So I feel like we're really seeing the community come together and saying, all right, this is a safe person, right? I feel like
Yeah.
this is a safe person I can talk to. They're all
Yeah.
kind of related in a way. Like
Mhm.
that group of boys looked around and said, this is a safe place.
Yeah, and I do.
That was important.
Yeah, I do definitely want to. We should spend some time on Duran's talk, but going off of that, yeah, I told because I spend a lot of time with the high school boys this weekend, and I looked at them on Sunday, and I said, you know what I've realized about you guys this weekend? This is a group, but you're all alone, right? Think about like an all-star team, right? You have a team. It's just a group of guys that are really good at what they do, but they're not actually a team.
Yeah,
they're just a
right.
couple of guys on a court or on the ice or on the field, right? I was like, I look at them, and it's like you guys are on. You're doing this by yourselves. Like you come here to youth group, you go on retreats, you go on Sunday mornings, and you spend time with one another. Maybe you hang out a little bit outside of it, right? You worship next to each other, but at the end of the day, you guys are alone. And what I encourage them is like and I did see this weekend. I had a guy come up to me. He's like, yeah, I feel alone. I was like, I encourage, and Corey mentioned this a bit in his talk, like it takes a step of vulnerability to realize that, and then to seek out that community.
Yeah.
And I encouraged him, like, figure out who here has similar goals to you and go seek them out. And that's the thing that we saw in our small groups this week is like we realized these students, they realized they're all going through similar stuff. Like you just said, oh yeah, I do that too. Oh yeah, I struggle with this too. Oh yeah, I don't have those kind of friends either.
Yeah.
Right. And these walls start coming down, and they kind of you start to realize that we need each other for these kind of things, and to walk through this Christian life successfully, we really do need the people around us. That's God created us to be in community, and the only way to do that is to tear down your walls. Like Corey used this great example, like vulnerability, like what the treasure you're searching for is this dark cave in your chest that we're all running in your heart that we're all running away from, right? And with the treasure in that chest, you got to get someone with you to go into that cave and get it with you. But yeah, we really realized how important it is, and that so many people, like not just our students, right? I'm sure there's Christians all over the world who are just on an island.
Yeah.
Like they think they have true community because they're in a, they attend a small group, or they go to church every Sunday, or they're on the worship team or whatever. But in reality, you don't, because you have walls built up, and you're not allowing people to experience your heart as it truly is.
Yeah. I also like how Duran mentioned how she reached out to all the leaders and asked like a lot of people to pray for her and pray for 3 things, and just really like seeking that out, and how faith became like the universal ground for everyone. And when you're talking about in small group, how everyone's becoming vulnerable and opening their hearts up, like that universal foundation of faith and of being vulnerable with each other and dealing with things with God, but also in community, should be how we unite and how we all become each other's safe person. And just letting faith and God be like our topic of obviously like being saved, but also the solution to all things. And I just like how like that should be all of our foundation, and for it to become our universal foundation, now we're all together. Now there's no one person alone on a team. Like we should all be individually fighting, but also that's what brings us together. That's what makes us community, because we fight for one another.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like if you're sick, or you have symptoms, or you get injured or something, and let's just say you're by yourself. A lot of people go to Google, they're searching things. How do you think all those people feel? Horrible. They're like, I have cancer, I'm going to die. This is all miserable, right? Versus you experience that and you go somewhere, you go to a doctor.
Yeah.
It's totally different. You have a nurse come in. Hey, let's check things out. Let's
Right.
get this going. Doctor comes in. Hey, let's talk about this. What was going on? Blah, blah, blah. Like there's a totally different mindset. There's a totally different path of healing that you experience. Yeah. And the one where you're by yourself is horrible. It's miserable. And it only ends to just like a deeper, darker hole, which, like I think we talked about in our small group, is like sin just thrives in secrecy. Sin just thrives in isolation. And I think that would be the same thing with a physical pain, right? A mental pain and physical pain are all very similar at the end. And I think when you go to people, you open up, you show them, this is what's going on. I'm hurting here. Can you help fix this? Doctor's going to be like, yeah, I've seen this before. I do this all the time. Like when I got my appendix out, it's like, all right, I've done, probably 100 appendectomies. I know how to solve this. But if I just stayed home, never would have been healed. Never would have felt better. So I think we saw that this weekend, and just honestly lives being healed and changed because people were willing to go and open up their wounds and say, hey, let's address this so we can be healed.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about Duran's talk too. And just, she talked about God in those tough times. And I think the coolest thing that she did, right? Her talk was incredible. But the coolest thing she did is towards the end of her message, she had people shout out, like, when you think of God in the really good times, how do you think of God? And people were shouting all these awesome things about God out. She's like, good. Now, in the bad times, all those things that you shouted out, shout them out again, because it's the same. Right. And we don't think that, right? We get into that deep pit where it's just like, oh my gosh, God hates me. Like, I'm not in God's favor. No. Right. Duran also said that we're not guaranteed to never go through dark times. We're going to suffer as Christians. Like, we have an episode on the show for that a while back, right? It's going to happen, but that doesn't mean God's not there. That doesn't mean God's not working through it. We actually just talked about this on Behind the Pulpit too, funnily enough. And that just hit me so hard. It's just like, yeah, it's the same adjectives. It's the same characteristics to describe God in both situations. It's just so powerful.
Yeah, I think it makes you view suffering a bit differently, because you're recognizing in the same way that God has purposefully blessed you and prospered you and given you maybe a safe and comfortable life at certain points, the same times that you're going through difficulty, he's still the same purposeful God. He's still making each and every scenario purposeful. Like, this is all working together for his will in the same way that your blessing was. So I think it also leads you to have more reverence for God in a way, because you're realizing I'm not even in control even when I thought I was. Even when every plan was working out perfectly, I'm still not in control in the same way I'm not in control when things are bad. And it just helps you recognize God's holiness a bit more and the ways that his will works in your life equally in all times, not just in the good times. Oh, God is so good. God is so good. He is still good in the bad times. And I think that's simple, but it's also a concept that people struggle with when they find themselves becoming prideful in those good seasons. And then when you're so humbled in the bad season, you're thinking, I'm not in control at all. Well, that must mean that God's not in control. He doesn't know what he's doing. And just kind of building our trust on something that is firm and truth all the time. Like Duran said, he is truth. He is good all the time. It doesn't matter what we're going through or our circumstances, but he's still the same Father. So he will still work in my life in the same way.
Yeah. And that's the danger with something like the prosperity gospel, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Where, we have people preaching like, if you're faithful to God, you're going to be healthy, you're going to be wealthy, everything's going to go right. No, look at Job, look at Paul, look at the disciples, right? There's so many examples. Paul was in prison. Job had everything taken away. The disciples literally were hung upside down and, boiled alive, right? But God was still faithful, right? We are going to go through things. Like Duran went through a really, really tough time in her life, but God was still faithful, right? You might be going through a really tough time right now. God is still faithful. At the end of the day, God is still on the throne, right? And just because we're faithful does not mean everything's going to go right, right? So, if that was the truth, and I've been faithful to God for, a while in my life now, I'd be a lot thinner than I was right now, right? No, that's not how that works. We're going to go through tough times. We're going to have our imperfections, but God's still on the throne and God's faithful.
Yeah.
Amen.
And like maybe everything wasn't right, but like Duran said, she still had joy. She still had peace in chaos. Like you're still given that faith. You're still given the foundation of God, even when everything, quote unquote, isn't right. Or isn't good, I should say, or comfortable, you're still given faith. Like God provides abundantly just as much in those hard seasons.
Amen. Yeah. So impactful. Both of those things for me, just walking home, just moved, honestly. Like yeah. Whenever we experience that and I see that, I'm just like, you don't get this anywhere. You don't get this anywhere. Like really that safe, vulnerable openness. We both went to school. We were involved in sports teams and other groups. There's no way I would trust any of those groups with anything ever. Yeah. One, that they would not share it with someone else, and two, that they would even help me.
Yeah, right? I agree.
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine right now, like in high school or even college, if I went up to someone on my track team, I was like, hey man, can I just talk to you about this thing? I'm really struggling with X. And they're just like, what?
Yeah.
Why are you talking to me about this? And then
or they give you advice and you're just like, Oh yeah.
That's the other
And
thing.
then you're like, wow, that would honestly make this situation worse
Yeah.
for me.
Or if it's not even advice, it's just, yeah, that is awful. Isn't that awful? That's
Yeah.
horrible what you're going
Yeah.
through. Like,
we were talking about this in our small group. Like we brought up the idea of friendships, right? And we were like, you guys don't have as many friends as you think, right? What is a friend, right? And I was just like, oh my gosh, yeah, Like,
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
believe, like I don't have that, right? That person you can, and someone in our group is like, well, I feel like I have that. And it's someone that is not rooted in Christ. And when you realize, and you can play the situation out in your head, like you were just saying, you can go and like you can take a situation that you might be going through. Let's say if I brought it to Johnny, or I brought it to like Dave from, not Pastor Dave. All right, it was just the first Dave from or Matthew from math class or something like that, right? They're going to give you two completely different. They could give you two completely different advices, or they might give you similar advice but rooted in completely different things.
Yeah.
Right, for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important, as Corey said in his talk, to guard your heart and really make sure. Like, it is important to be vulnerable, but it's just as important to guard who you're being vulnerable with.
right.
Because that really molds who you are.
And to seek out, if you feel like you don't have that, seeking that out, like you said before.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a full weekend.
Oh, absolutely.
Seems like.
Yeah.
And we just asked 3 of our 68 people.
Yep.
Imagine if we had them
63
all.
more
Oh my
people.
God. We had them everybody packed in.
yeah.
Just like, all right, next.
Yeah.
Hello. What did you experience?
Hello. well, we prayed, and I think the Lord answered that. He
Amen.
would just do amazing things this weekend. He
Amen.
did.
Yeah.
And just praying for the lasting impact on all those that came out.
Absolutely.
So fun. Well, Tim, thanks for
Absolutely.
being on here.
I'm normally, there's no one back there, guys.
Yeah.
I have been doing this
Yeah.
on my iPad, and it actually
Surprise, surprise.
didn't go horribly. I think
Yeah.
this
I think
could,
it went well.
Yeah.
if you guys will have me back, if you ever don't
Our
have a
dream
guest,
team, yeah.
I would love that.
We'll kick Tim back behind.
Yeah, you know,
Camera next
I'm
episode.
ready to hide again now.
Go back to your dark
I'm ready for some
corner.
lunch. It's been 2 podcasts. Back
Oh,
to
man.
back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was fun. Great weekend. Get some rest. We're excited as we continue on here at the Fresh Wave.
Absolutely.
Have an awesome day.